Hello, welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I'm Renee Allen, the host of this podcast, and it's my birthday. I'm actually recording the same day I'm publishing this episode. So if you're listening on a Tuesday in October, same week, maybe I won't give out my birthday to everyone, but it's my birthday today. I'm laughing at myself because I was trying to be a little discreet, but then I realized it's going to have the date that this episode was published. So I just told everyone my birthday. But anyway, happy birthday to me. It's not like I go out in the world and tell everyone, hey, it's my birthday, but I'm amongst friends, right? I'm talking to you. We understand each other. We have ADHD. Yeehaw. So here I am, and I am going to have a podcast episode that is a part 2 to the last one. And I don't know if your age shows up in this way for you, but for me, I have a hard time planning things ahead. I mean, I can plan a party. I can plan that kind of stuff. I can plan what we're going to eat for Christmas dinner, although I don't make Christmas dinner. Maybe the night before I might. But I don't do as well with like if I'm doing public speaking or something. I will know what I'm going to talk about. I'll have a framework. I might have a few stories. But a second before, I might change my mind, and I might change my mind throughout. And so when I made the last episode, that was going to be one episode, but I could see as I was going that it needed more exploration because I was exploring along with you listening. I had some preparation, but I was learning as I went, and I realized I need more time for this. And so I thought at the end of the last one, it'll probably be a 2-part episode, but now I'm thinking it could be 3 parts. We shall see. You'll be able to tell if you come on here later, but that's how I roll. I have to see how it goes as I go. And I don't know where that comes from. In ADHD, a lot of us are empathetic, very empathetic. Some might even say we're empaths. I don't know if that has anything to do with this, but I know when I teach a yoga class, I go in with an idea, and sometimes I start out with that idea. I look around, I see everyone, I have a feeling for how it's going or what I should do or maybe what somebody else might want, and I'm trying to sense it without asking them. I found that if I ever asked, do you have requests? They usually just stare at me. Very rarely does someone say, can you do this pose? Most of the time they just say, you just tell us what to do. They don't want to think about it. They're not there to design a class. They're there to just listen to me and do what they need to with their bodies. And so I found that whatever the plan A may turn to plan B to C to Q or whatever. And that happens on my podcast too. But since I'm talking to other women with ADHD, it's wonderful because I don't feel, I feel a different expectation from you than I might neuronormal, what's that word for it? Neurotypical audience, because we tend to forget anyway. So I might say one thing one episode, and the next one, you've forgotten that I said this was going to be 2-part anyway. You might go, oh, yeah, I didn't even know it was going to be 2-part. Here we go again. You know, if you forget things like I do, you have no expectation. And that is pretty great. And you're also understanding of someone who may bounce around if you have that hyperactive component or the forgetting component. So here we go. So last episode, I know I don't need to review too much because you could just go back and listen if you haven't heard it, but I was talking about OCD and OCPD. So we are pretty familiar. Most of us are pretty familiar with OCD. We know what we've seen on TV shows. We might know somebody with it. I don't think I actually know anybody with it, but I've seen TV shows or I've heard enough to know, oh, if somebody's like really obsessed about how clean something is, then they have OCD or they may have OCD, you know, whatever idea I have. And I think it's become kind of common to just say, yeah, I'm OCD about that. You know, you use it more as slang, even though technically we may not be diagnosable. We don't actually have the disorder. It's just another way to say, yeah, I get obsessed about this sometimes. And it can be confusing because with ADHD, Having obsessions or addictions are common. And I also thought maybe we were compulsive, but in the last episode, I learned what compulsion is. And maybe we have it, but not to the same degree as OCD. But there are people with ADHD who also have OCD. So right now I'm talking mostly to you as if you don't have OCD. But if you do have it, there are people that have both disorders. And it's good to learn about them and know what the root is for each of them. But a compulsive action, a compulsion, is a repetitive anger. Oh my goodness. Sometimes things just fly out of my mouth that aren't even having anything to do with it. Repetitive behaviors that relieve the anxiety. So the anxiety comes up, these thoughts come, and they just won't stop. And in order to relieve that anxiety, the repetitive behavior releases that. I can actually see sometimes in ADHD, not for the same reason, not because of anxiety, but I think going down the rabbit hole, the hyperfocus is a way of doing that. Maybe it's not a repetitive behavior, so it's not exactly the same thing. But in a way, it takes you into a lane and you don't have to go out of it. So my example I always think of, and I did this for years before I knew I had ADHD, was I'd go in a room to clean, and I never want to just do surface cleaning unless people are coming soon and I have to just do surface cleaning. There's no choice. You run around and do surface cleaning. And in that case, all the things that I don't have time to organize, so paperwork's the bane of my existence. That's a hard one for a lot of people with ADHD. It's so overwhelming. Any bill paying, paperwork, financial stuff just sends me through the roof. But if I had my stack of papers that I ended up putting in a drawer, that I ended up, who knows, I need to move that when people are coming, I would just put it in a grocery bag and put it in a closet. So I hide my things that I can't deal with when I don't have time to clean them. But my ideal way of cleaning something is to do it thoroughly, is to have the time to do the paper stuff. But the reality of the paper stuff, and the reason it's been in my existence, is I think I still have boxes of paperwork I haven't gone through. And it's not like I've saved everything. I did buy a shredder. I have done things to help. I have a friend who was an accountant who came over and gave me a little file and was so helpful in her way. I mean, she was helpful, but it just didn't last very long for me. But I do have some boxes from each house that I've lived in back to 2009 that have some papers in it that I go through, and I still can't get rid of all of them. And they don't serve any purpose. I should just tell someone to just take them and throw them away. My son-in-law is really good at being brutal with getting rid of stuff. I wonder if he'd do that for me the next time they come over. Just have him go to a box, go look at a box that would have no sentimental meaning to him or troubled meaning. Anyway, yeah, that was a tangent. But I do think that we have behaviors that we do to relieve that overwhelm, and whether that's an anxiety or not. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a specialist in this, a medical specialist. But in just trying to understand in the kind of terms that make sense to me without reading the medical journals, it feels to me like if I go in a room and there's so much to do, breaking it down is helpful. And I used to teach my kids that. Okay, your room is a mess. You have toys everywhere. Let's start with the Legos. And we pick up all the Legos, which is helpful because if you're a mom and you step on Legos, it hurts really bad. It really hurts. That was before I learned about the blanket. And if you don't know about the blanket or sheet, is you have them play with all the Legos on that thin blanket or sheet. And when they're done, you just wrap it all up like it's a dumpling or something, like the little, and it kind of pinches at the top, put it in a big box, put the lid on it. Next time they want to play, take it out. And that's so much better. But it took me a long time to figure that out. But you start with something simple and then you do that. And then you go put the books away and then you go put the other things. So as my husband used to tell my kids, one by one until it's done. But sometimes that can be really overwhelming for us, the big picture of it. And to calm that, we find a lane that we can go in. and think, oh, not only am I going to put the books away, but I'm going to soothe my mind by reorganizing all the books. I'll put all the paperback books here. I'll put all the hardbound books here. I'll put these on the shelf. I'll color coordinate them. All those things, I don't know if they're technically compulsions. They're not like washing your hands over and over. But I've done that so much over the years that I set up a new system, and that organization component in my mind is really soothing. And it's nice when I can do it in a simplified way. And I think that's why, people who are saying, this is how you organize a room, get one box that says donate, one bag that says throw away, and one box that you take stuff in the other room. And that simplifies each decision you make as you pick something up or put it away or whatever it is. And so simplicity is relaxing for our brains, and it might relieve that overwhelm of, I can't do all of that. Well, I can do this. So that's where I see some connection with OCD. And OCPD is different. It has not a calming of anxiety or overwhelm. I don't know if you can call overwhelm anxiety. Although, okay, so I'm not somebody who had anxiety before I found out I had ADHD. If I did, it was maybe like 2 times I can think of, and who knows why. But I did see that I have always loved to organize. I've always loved to have things clean and in order. It doesn't mean there aren't spots in my house that have something I stashed here. Like I still have a bag of tissue paper and ribbon from Christmas last year. And I know I should just throw it away or smooth it out and roll up the ribbon like I've done in the past. But there are some things in there I have to make decisions about, like, do I keep this little box? And I can't deal with that. So anyway, it's still there. And honestly, I should tell my husband for my birthday today to throw it away from me because it's just up in the closet staring at me. Anyway, so OCPD also needs order and control. And perfectionism is a big piece of it. And they have routines and standards that things must be done, and they're really rigid about it. So if this person lives alone, maybe it's not a big deal because they can just keep their cupboards like they want, unload the dishwasher, load it like they want, whatever their standards, their routines are, shut the door, open the door. I don't know if I told you that my dad has a 2-second rule, I think, on the front door, back door, that he doesn't want to open for longer than that so that no animals from outside come in. And they have a normal yard and stuff, but they live in Nevada. So there are rattlesnakes there. There are, I don't know what he could tell you all the things. And I used to kind of laugh at that. But now that I live in Florida and there's so many bugs, I've kind of become the same way. I'm trying to not be rigid about it. Like, shut that door, shut the door. It's not shut all the way. I don't want bugs to come in. But the person with OCPD isn't driven by the same thing as somebody with OCD or even ADHD, unless you have an overlap. But the desire for having that control or things done a certain way is just that, almost like the blinders are on and this is the way it needs to be done. And like my dad says, I'm not worrying because I'm preventing that worry from happening by having this system, this way of it happening, the way that it needs to be done. And of course, it sounds like I'm diagnosing my dad, but I will give a quote about if you see symptoms in somebody or in yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have it. So this is by a woman that's an expert. I'm not going to look into that too much. She has a lot of letters after her name. It says, where people go wrong is that they take tiny pieces of a disorder and go, that kind of fits me. Well, tiny pieces of most disorders can fit a bunch of people. I guess I need to say her name because I'm quoting her, Tracy Zinman Ibrahim. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. But basically, she's just saying that there are a lot of people who have OCPD traits without having the personality disorder. But there are a lot of crossovers of similar things that we do, and there's a different reason for doing it. So what I find fascinating is the numbers, the statistics. And most of us, I'm guessing, have heard of OCD, but not OCPD. But OCPD is far more common, which is really interesting. It said that OCPD can begin in your late teens, early 20s, more common in adults with the highest level of education being high school. So this is where I think it's super interesting because OCPD, sorry, I keep tripping over my letters here. OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, is the most common personality disorder in the United States. Isn't that interesting? Because most people, when I mention OCPD, they say, "What's that?" But if you say OCD, they say, "Oh, yeah." So, according to this article, this is through the Cleveland Clinic. They have a lot of helpful information on mental health. But it says that OCPD affects 3 to 8% of adults. And I thought that's like a high number, but I guess it is, because if you look at bipolar disorder, 2.6%. That's the estimate, 2.6. And so OCPD between 3 and 8%. OCD between 1.6% and 2.3. So let's just say 2%. That's lower than 3 to 8%. Interesting, huh? And then borderline personality disorder, which I personally know people with this, and there are famous people who have made it public that they have BPD. So I think it's becoming something that people know more about than they used to. It says it's relatively rare. 1.4% of the US has BPD, and nearly 75% of those diagnosed are female. So that's super interesting, huh? And narcissistic, of course, I went down the rabbit hole with this once I started thinking, well, to me, it's only helpful to know how common this is if I know everything, all the other disorders, maybe not every single one, but the ones I'm familiar with. So narcissistic personality disorder, that one's between 0.5 and 5%. So 5% is pretty high, but they said it's really hard to determine. And between 50 and 75% of the cases are men. They said it's hard to determine because a lot of people hide their narcissistic beliefs or behaviors. And so they have a hard time estimating it. It could be higher. So it could be higher than OCPD. But anyway, so what about ADHD? So ADHD is not a personality disorder. It's what's that word again? It's not, neurodivergent, yes. But what's the word when you're born with it? Oh, I know it. Do you do this? Of course, I had to look it up. If I went and did something else for 5 minutes, it would come into my mind, but I had to look it up. It's neurodevelopmental. So it's not a personality disorder. Personality disorders are different. They're developed later. But it's interesting because as I looked at that, into that, like, well, what causes this? They say it can be a mixture of psychological things that happen in your life, and genetic components. And I'm wondering if those genetic components aren't like a neurodevelopmental thing where you are born with a brain that functions or dysfunctions in this way, like ADHD or autism. But if you could have more of a genetic component to have anxiety or depression, and that can run in families. And some of these disorders happen more in people who already have those conditions. So, yeah, so much to dig. But I really wanted to try to keep this simple today. I don't think I'm doing a very good job of keeping it simple. But I'll go back to ADHD. It's kind of interesting because now that we're talking about the percentages. So 11% of children have, between the ages of 2 and 17, so I guess they're not diagnosing babies, have received an ADHD diagnosis. That doesn't mean that more people don't have it. Like probably 4 of my children, maybe 5, were never diagnosed as children, and at least 3 of them for sure have it, maybe 2 more. How common is it for adults? I thought this was interesting, between 2.5 and 6.7% of adults worldwide. That's interesting because obviously a lot of people aren't diagnosed, don't know. I was diagnosed in my high 50s. A lot of people are diagnosed in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So whenever these statistics are made, that's probably before a lot of people realize it. And there may be a lot of people who don't realize it. But this is also interesting. They said that 15 to 20% of adults diagnosed as children still fully meet the criteria for it. So that means they're saying 75 to 80% of children by adulthood, they don't have enough of the symptoms to have a diagnosis. Like if they went into the doctor and they asked them all those questions, they'd be more functional in certain areas than they were as children. And I think I'll leave that for another episode because that would be something interesting to explore too. But back to our ADHD comparison. That's where I started. And they're just so, it's just, I don't know. Do you get curious? Curiosity is a big component of ADHD for sure. But back to ADHD and how it can be similar to OCD, more of that than the OCPD, because ADHD does have some structure, some organization, some things, if people have that as part of what helps them or the need for that. It may be hard to do that. Some people are able to have that organization and some aren't. But some ADHD behaviors that may look like OCD from the outside are things like spending a lot of time arranging, organizing, cleaning things. And the person with OCD is doing that because they have some anxiety, and that is relieving that anxiety. And they realize this is a problem. They have that mindset, this is a problem. And they're trying to relieve that. Someone with OCPD may be doing those things, but it's because in their mind, this is the way you need to do it. We need to have control over our lives. This is the best way. And they have their reason. They have their logic, their reason. A person with ADHD can be doing the same thing. It can be a coping mechanism. It can be something that takes that buildup when you don't have enough dopamine. You're trying to get something done and you kind of can't do it. And you just see something like, oh, I can just clean that bathroom drawer right now and reorganize all my makeup. And you spend 2 hours doing that because you found something that you can wrap your head around, and it's a coping thing. It may also be a distraction. Maybe you have something to do that's way more important, and you do something, and it doesn't even have to be the cleaning and organizing. I don't know if you do this, but I find myself doing things like I like to frame pictures, not just to like put a photo in a frame, but maybe find a picture on a calendar that I liked or something and think, oh, that might fit in this one. Oh, I'll do this. And then I'll go take some frames and redo them and cut the edges and stuff. And it's just an orderly thing that I like doing. It just calms me. It gets me into this little system, or like reorganizing books on a shelf. And sometimes I tell myself this is a form of procrastination. It's actually something that's keeping me from doing what I really need to do. And I often give myself this message of no one else cares about this right now but you. Like you need to be doing something else, and you're changing this picture on the wall and the other one was just fine. So sometimes there's that awareness that what we're doing is not the most important thing to do, but it's a form of procrastination, which is a typical trait for people with ADHD. And it also can be a coping skill because it puts you in a state of mind where you're more calm and you think, okay, this feels good to clean. I get on hands and knees and clean on the floor, not every day. I mean, I wish my floors were really clean, but there are times, especially when I'm talking to somebody, I'll just get on the floor and start cleaning. Like I'm talking on the phone, which doesn't happen as often. But there are some things that maybe make it so I can listen and hear. It's keeping my body busy. Have you ever done that with your child? If you have a child with ADHD and, stop moving, stop doing this, stop doing that, or a teacher who says that. I used to clean out my purse in classes in high school. Like, oh, I think I'll clean out my purse right now. And I take everything out and put a little pile with all the papers that I need to throw away or whatever. It's not like I had a lot in there, but I remember doing it, and sometimes teachers were fine with it and other times they weren't. But I was always able to listen. In my math class, our teacher used to let us French braid each other's hair. If the person in front of you had long hair, you could French braid, and I'd still be learning. But I think sometimes it's just having something to do that helps us get in a state where we can function better, hopefully, right? So that can mimic those obsessive compulsive behaviors or compulsive behaviors, they might look like that, rearranging things, checking things, even just preventing clutter and disorganization because you can't function in that environment. So it's not for the same reason of somebody who says this has to be this way, I have to have control over it. But it's just that I got to clean this, because tomorrow morning I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do if this is a mess. I won't be able to come into this room and do what I need to do. I won't be able to watch this movie unless all these things between my eyes and the TV are cleaned up. And I do that sometimes, a lot of times. Anyway, it's interesting to just see the behaviors you have, especially if you're a mom and your kids have said to you, and that's where I learned that I did all this with the let's all watch a movie together in the days of renting a video or a DVD or whatever, and we'd all gather together, that I would keep standing up and, oh, that's in my way. I'm going to stand up. And then the light on the DVD player would be a little bright in that dark room, and I'd have to stand up and get a little cloth to cover the light. And it was just my way of relaxing so I could actually do it. The clutter was getting in the way of my mind being able to just function and enjoy the movie. Yeah, so there might be some compulsions. And I think I started this podcast out saying, I don't know if they're compulsions, but I think they are. I think if we're compelled to do something, whether it's not repetitive like OCD, the washing of the hands, and I don't know how many things, OCD people do, but those compulsions help us, even just the walking, the moving, the hyperactive component. I think that's part of it. I think it's helping our brains so that we aren't going crazy inside. One of my friends, Darcy, I don't know if she's listening, but when I came out to the world that I had ADHD, I mostly just went onto Facebook and said, hey, I just found out, and I'm super curious who else has it or who spotted it in me, because now I'm starting to wonder about these, now that I'm learning more about it. I know I'm jumping all over in that sentence, but she told me she did. And I didn't know she did. But when she first came to my yoga class, she said, my daughters just laughed when I told them I was going to yoga, because they said, how could you be still? Like, how could you possibly do that? And her daughters loved yoga and stuff. And she ended up super loving yoga and finding the value for it in her life. But but when she told me she had ADHD, I thought, really, really? And she told me that when we used to have our meetings at the gym that we worked at, she taught the cycle classes or the spin classes, and I taught yoga there. She said a lot of times I'd just be like just going crazy inside. Like, I can't remember how she described it. And I said, oh, I always call that like my head's going to explode. Like, I can't sit here for another second. And it wasn't that she didn't like being with everyone. She just needed to move. She needed to, have that ability to do something that made it so she could calm down, so maybe if she was able to go over and clean the sink while she was listening or something, she would have been able to be happier being in that environment. Who knows? I don't know what it is for her, but that would help me just to have a task to do that I could easily do without overthinking it. A way that ADHD can look like OCPD, that perfectionistic tendency, which I think both have that, the need for perfectionism. If you have that aspect of ADHD, I know we're all different. We have just a smorgasbord of symptoms to choose from. Well, maybe we didn't choose them, but we get them. So it can show up in different ways. But if you have sensitivity to sound, light, like here I am watching this movie and I see that light on the DVD player, I can't see that screen very well. That light is there. Or I'm in a movie theater and thinking I'm having a good seat, and then a family comes and the husband, who's so tall, sits right in front of me, and I see his head on part of the screen. And maybe it's just a small part of the screen, but that bugs me. That's a sensory sensitivity. It's not an inability to be fine. It really is a sensory sensitivity. And so when those things happen, somebody might think, oh, you have this need for it to be a certain way because you're OCD about it. And I even said that to my kids once before I knew anything about this, or that I had ADHD. I was buying tickets to a play, and I said, these ones are a little cheaper, but I know if I sit there, there's a chance that I won't be able to see the stage as well. and I might be like unhappy or just like not relaxed the whole time. I won't be, what's the word? Like I'll be a little bit stressed the whole time. And I'll be wishing like, oh, I should have gotten the other seats. I won't be able to just have a good experience. So I said, I'm going to spend a little more and we're going to sit here. And I told my daughter at the time, I don't have OCD, I have OCD because any seat that I sit in, whether it's laying down to watch a movie at home, I need to have a certain way that I am between me and the screen, or me and the stage, or me and a speaker. And my kids have been the one that taught me that by saying, Mom, it's okay. It'll be okay. Like, don't make us move again. In movie theaters now, you're not supposed to move because your seats are assigned. But we went to Disney World and went to the Indiana Jones show, which I don't know if any of you haven't been to Disney World. It's different, a lot different than the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland, which I actually like better. But the Indiana Jones show is this huge, 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 huge stage and a gigantic amphitheater. And you're sitting there and they have giant fans and it's covered because if you're there in the summer, it's hot and humid and stuff. But you sit and wait for a little while. And then they do a show with stunt people that show you how they make movies and how they do the scenes in Indiana Jones and stuff. So anyway, my daughter and I got in there a little early and we sat down. I'm like, oh, we got here early. We can choose seats. Okay, this seems like a good place to sit. And not being at the show before, I didn't know how much do I need to see. I didn't know that the front of the stage was only going to be like that for 5 minutes. I don't know, 10 minutes. They were going to pull back something and all of a sudden it's just a gigantic stage and everyone could see just fine no matter what. But anyway, we sat down and of course somebody sat there tall in front of me. So I'm like, let's move over here. Let's move over here. Okay, let's go up 2 rows. And about the 4th time of our move, she's like, Mom, we are not moving anymore. And that was hard for me because I thought, oh no, what if I can't see over this person? And it just affects us. So does that mean I'm OCPD? I don't think so. I'm not requiring it of anybody else. I mean, I could move by myself and be fine. Like nobody else needs to follow the structure or system, but I have a sensitivity to how I'm sitting, how I'm facing, if I'm comfortable in my body, if there's light and certain sounds. A lot of sounds are just fine and other sounds can drive me crazy. Yeah, I could tell 5 more stories about that, but I'll just leave it at that. You may have your own stories, but there have been times where it's like the head's going to explode, put my hands over my ears and walking out when a microphone malfunctions or something. And everyone else is kind of like, we're okay, but I'm not. And that's okay. We can be different and that's okay. So another thing that can be mistaken for OCD, back to OCD, the last one was OCPD, although there could be, overlaps there with OCD, with the sensitivities and that sort of thing. But hyperfocusing has a different purpose than overfocusing. So the compulsiveness of the OCD and the OCPD is an overfocus. They're focused on that and they can't stop, whether it's just the thoughts, the behavior. I'm knocking my hands together, but the system, the planning, and the hyper-focusing is different. So that could be another podcast episode. All of these could just be such deep dives. I think I'll make a blog post about this someday because there's so many overlaps in behavior, but differences. And one of them is OCD has thoughts that get stuck, that, becomes an obsessive thought, and they have a really hard time shifting away from those thoughts. And that's driven by anxiety. Well, ADHD, your thoughts can be scattered and jumping all over the place, more of that popcorn brain. Or you can also have thoughts or a song or something that goes in your head over and over and over and over. And that's not any way similar to the thoughts with OCD. It might be, a song's in your head for, I don't know why sometimes these songs come in our heads, but they can be in there for days or hours, or you start singing them and then you start singing it again without even thinking about it. It's just the impulse, just the singing, just who knows why it's in there. But things do get stuck in your brain in ADHD, even though your brain can also be scattered. So that's kind of interesting. And just to compare brain chemistry of all three disorders, OCPD doesn't have as much detail, and maybe the brain chemistry normally isn't changed like it is for OCD, ADHD. I don't know. But what I did find on OCPD was very complex. And it is that they have altered spontaneous neural activity. So you have neurons in your brain that fire spontaneously. And I guess that's supposed to give us a healthy way of thinking. And with OCPD, it's altered. Maybe a lot of people have altered spontaneous neural activity. I don't know. But anyway, that's what studies have shown in multiple brain regions. And so it's causing problems with flexibility, and it causes this need for control. And so there is a brain component for that. With OCD and ADHD, we know that ADHD, or most of us know anyway, is executive dysfunction, and it's a problem in the frontal lobe of the brain. And OCD is also a problem in the frontal lobe of the brain, but they have different problems. So the ADHD doesn't have enough dopamine and not enough norepinephrine in the brain. OCD has too much serotonin. And so what that does is, even though some of the behaviors may look similar from the outside, there's actually different things going on in the brain. And the person with like the hyperactive ADHD would be fidgety, restless, impulsive, whatever they want to call us. One of the words here was careless. I don't know that we're careless. Come on, we just don't notice everything. Where the person, I mean, I guess there's a purpose for it because we're comparing to OCD. The person with OCD has the opposite thing happening. They're more cautious, more careful, more focused, and more attentive to everything. They're noticing more where we might be noticing less. And then the people who have the inattentive, ADHD, distracted, daydreamy, forgetful, those aren't things that people with OCD deal with unless they have more than one diagnosis. And that is possible, but it's just not as common. So I think that's plenty of information for today. Is your head going to explode? It is interesting to learn about, but some things I learn better listening, and some things it's good to see written. But a lot of the information that we can look up online is done with so much clutter on the websites that it's hard to make sense of it. And if you're even just reading a text and you only take out 6 words and think you know what it said, which I do a lot, and then misunderstand, it's even harder to look at an article that has so much information and try to make sense of it. It's not that we're not brilliant. It's just that our brains pick up things in patches. And so sometimes listening to it is helpful. I am fascinated that when I listen to things multiple times, that there's so many things I didn't hear the first time, but then the pieces come together more. But I am going to blog more. My blog articles right now are really just me writing to have something on my blog page. When I set up my website, I'm going to be a lot more purposeful with it and have them line up with my podcast episodes and give information that might be easier for you to find and digest, and not have ads everywhere. Oh my goodness, that drives me nuts. So anyway, ending on that happy note, but thank you so much for being here. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love it if you join my email list if you're not already on it, because it's a way to communicate. Sometimes I ask questions. Sometimes I get ideas from the people that are in that list of what you need help with, what you'd like me to dive into more. And it's not just for podcast purposes, but also my blog. And in my email, I'll give tips each week and information that might be helpful, and eventually create some courses and some accountability groups as a part of those courses, where we're not just taking a course on our own and then forgetting about it, or having it be something on the shelf of our brains that's sort of like, oh gosh, I'm never going to get that done. When am I going to find time to do that? But if we do it together, it can be more fun, and it's something that's more doable. When we know we have a friend to meet to go walk on the beach, if you live near a beach, you do it more often than you do just on your own. So that might go for any walking, but I lived close to the beach and I didn't go nearly as often as I should have. But if I had a friend to meet, or if people came from out of town, we went, because that was the body doubling, the doing it with somebody else. And just being able to do something with someone makes it way more doable. But that is it for now. Thank you so much for being here. Have a happy, happy day. And I'll be back in a couple days. Bye.
Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause, no time for a pause. The silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.